Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, where we have our webinar that's going to be exploring the key changes to the new Junior Cycle SPHE course, which was updated in September. My name is Conor Walker, and I work with the publishing team in Folens. Very shortly, I'm going to hand you over to Stephanie Mangan, who'll step you through the SPHE course, the changes that have happened, and she might dip as well into the new SPHE for Wellbeing programme that we worked together on over the last 12 to 18 months or so now it is at this stage. But I'll just jump through looking at the next slide at the running order, just so that everybody can get their bearings. I suppose in the main, what we're going to have is the presentation with Stephanie. I'll get out of the way and I'll let Stephanie take the lion's share of the limelight here. But at the end of the webinar, we're going to take a Q&A session. So we'll answer as many questions as we can by the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, just fire them into the chat there across you should see the chat speech bubble on your menu. If you just put those through, we will get through as many of those questions as we possibly can. A couple of other things just to bear in mind as well. The webinar itself is being recorded, so don't worry about having to take notes or anything like that. We can share the recording with you very shortly after the webinar finishes, certainly by the end of this week. And we're also going to share Stephanie's slide deck with you, so you don't need to worry about taking note of any web links or URLs or anything like that. All the live links are in the presentation and you'll have access to the file that contains those. We'll share those with you as well before the end of the week. So next, it's just a quick reminder that this webinar coincides with the publication of our brand new SPHE for Wellbeing series, which covers the 3 years of Junior Cycle SPHE, and it's fully aligned to the updated course. All books are available, and if you'd like to take a look at the books and the various other digital resources and the planning that we have for units of learning in the Teacher's Guide, feel free to check them out at folens.ie and you can take a look through them there. Next, the next is the main event. We're going to hand you over to Stephanie now. So she'll speak to you for the next, I suppose, 30 minutes or so. And then I'll come back at the end for the Q&A. So best of luck, Stephanie.
Thank you, Conor, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. I know it's a very busy time of year for all of us with home economics. Well, for me, we've home economics practicals, we've orals, we've mocks, everything on. So I hope that the next 45 minutes is worth your while coming here this evening, and I hope that you do learn something from it. Okay, so just to start off with a little bit about myself. So I have been teaching for almost 20 years. My main subject is home economics, and that overlaps with SPHE, which is how I got into SPHE in the first place. I actually did my thesis on RSE because it was in SPHE and in home economics also. And in my first year teaching, I had lots of SPHE on my timetable with no book, which led me to writing the first SPHE book in Ireland, which was very successful. It was Grow Up, and that was a long time ago. But since then, I've written the I Belong series and the My Life series, which a lot of people are using at the moment. In addition to being a teacher and an author, I'm also a parent to 3 children. And as of late, I'm a parent to a teenager, which has given me a whole new insight into teenagers and the life of boys. So I hope I can bring some of that to the lessons in SPHE as well. A lot of topics that are very relevant that I see myself in my teenager. So first of all, I'm going to start off with an overview of the new course for you. So as you know, the new specification, the 2023 specification, is what first years should be studying in school at the moment. Now, it was very late when the department kind of sanctioned the final specification. I think it was April or May when they finalised it. So a lot of teachers, SPHE teachers, weren't really ready for this specification in September. It was hard coming back to school and seeing it maybe for the first time for some people. And you wouldn't maybe have had time to look through everything. So it's understandable that a lot of people are still using the first year books from the 2016 specification. but it's easy enough to just change over. You can change over in second year to the new series. It's easy to do that. The toolkit is excellent. That has been published by the NCCA, and you can click on the link there when you get the slides and you can look at it. I'm not going to go into it all now, but there are brilliant resources on the toolkit. There's lots of information for the lessons, which are really useful. That only applies to the first year of the course, so hopefully they'll have the guidelines and resources and everything for second year published soon. IDGA don't have anything published on the website yet for SPHE, but it does say coming soon on the website, so hopefully that's the case. To give you an overview of the course, as you may know, it's designed for 100 hours of student engagement, and that can be arranged differently or timetable differently depending on your school. The learning outcomes do not have to be covered in sequential order, so you might go from learning outcome 1.2 to learning outcome 3.10 to learning outcome 4.1 in one lesson. A lot of them overlap. You mightn't even realize you're doing that. You don't have to do them in sequential order. And also it's important to realize you don't have to fully cover every learning outcome in each year. So some of the learning outcomes are longer, more complex, and you might do a part of it one year, a part of it another year. In SPHE for Wellbeing, I've covered all the learning outcomes in every year, but a certain part of that learning outcome. There's 2 learning outcomes I haven't covered in first year, but I'll talk to you about those later. So the new specification is split into 4 strands. Again, you can click on the link there to find out the full list of learning outcomes. I'm not going to go through all of them with you, but I will briefly talk you through what each strand is about. So in the first strand, it's about self-awareness and building self-esteem. There's a lot there about healthy relationships and self-management. So skills for self-management like organising themselves for school and study skills and things like that. In strand 2, it focuses on making healthy choices for their well-being. And a lot of that is based on accessing and assessing reliable and trustworthy information, which I think is very, very relevant at the moment when there's so much misinformation out there on social media. And then also looking at decision-making and developing their own decision-making skills as opposed to just copying what others do, and looking at what influences them. So that could be social media, that could be their peers, it could be anything, and how other people can impact on their decisions. Strand 3, relationships and sexuality, is one that has gotten a lot of attention in the media, and one maybe people might have more questions about, so I will talk about that more a little bit later on. But in this strand, similar to the 2016 specification, they're learning about relationships, relationships with family, relationships with friends, romantic relationships, sexuality, all aspects of sexuality, not just a lot of people seem to be focusing on gender and gender identity and all that, which is a small part of it, but other part of their sexuality as well, about their values and their beliefs and their experiences and things like that. Also in this strand, they learn about potential sexual relationships in the future, so about having healthy relationships, or how to recognize unhealthy relationships, and about consent and things. I'll talk about that as well later on. And the last strand then, strand 4, deals with emotional well-being. So it's kind of overall well-being, with a focus on creating positive mental health and how they can help themselves to have a more positive mental health, about how to develop their problem-solving skills and their coping skills. So I think there's more focus on resilience and how can they keep their mind healthy so they don't suffer from poor mental health, and what to do then, how they can find support if they do have poor mental health, who can support them, and where to find, again, reliable and trustworthy help if they need it. Okay, so moving on to then the assessment part of the new specification. So the NCCA said that teachers should be including assessment, so not just leaving it to the CBA in second and third year, that we should be planning formal assessment activities to check on students' progress, maybe at the end of a group of lessons or maybe at the end of a unit of learning. So in SPHE for Wellbeing, to cover this, I have put in an action page at the end of each strand. So I'll show you that later on, the action page, but it just helps you to remember that, you know, this is a part of the assessment. There's ideas given in various lessons for assessment, and there's a reflect at the end of each lesson as well. So it's just to include the assessment all the time. But to focus on the CBA, so the CBA happens in second or third year in SPHE. The teacher will decide which year it suits their class, and you have two choices for the CBA. So the first one, is a portfolio, and the portfolio is a collection of work that they have accumulated over second and third year. So it could be projects they worked on, it could be posters they worked on, it could be online stuff, it could be things that they put to display on their classroom, group projects, pair work, individual work. So a collection of work that they've worked on throughout their classes in SPHE and a reflection on that. Or the other option is, sorry, just to go back to portfolio, I kind of think it's similar to the punning for Gaeilge, the portfolio of work that they have to do. For the other option, then there's an action project, and that one kind of reminds me of the CSPE action project as well, that they pick an area that they're interested in and they do a project on that, so an action project on that. And again, they have to reflect on what they learned and what they did as part of their project. So to remind you that we are expected to use assessment throughout first year and second year, and the CBA can take place in second year or third year, and it will be reported in the JCPA as well. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about are the key features of SPHE for Wellbeing series books. So if you're familiar with previous books, my previous SPHE books, you know that I've done it in a lesson format, and I think this just makes it easier and more structured for the teacher to follow. At the beginning of each lesson, you'll see the learning intentions, you'll see the learning outcome, the numbers for the learning outcome. I didn't put in the full learning outcomes because some of the wording of them is very complicated. They are all in the teacher's guide, they're not in the student book. But if you want to look up the learning outcome, just look up that relevant number. The wellbeing indicators are listed at the bottom there. You see the symbols for those at the start of each lesson, and you can flick through the lessons yourself on the Poland's website. As I mentioned already, I've included some forms of assessment throughout each lesson, at the end of each strand as well. So at the end of each lesson, there's a reflect area. Now, I like this reflection. Sometimes we don't have time to fill it in. Sometimes it's just to help students recognize what did you actually learn today, when they say we were just talking, but you know, they did actually learn something when they were talking in the class. But also this is handy if you want them, if you want to kind of communicate with the parents. I find this is a useful way to do it. So if they're talking about, so if you were talking about something particularly sensitive in class today, you could say, I want you to show this to your parents tonight, and they can sign that little box on the reflection. So they're showing them a brief summary of what they were learning about in SPHE. And it can be a good way for students then to broach a topic with their parents if they don't really know how to ask them about something they were learning about in school. This can be a way to say, oh, my teacher asked me to get this signed because we were learning about this in school. At the end of each strand, there's a reflection as well, and they're just looking back over what they did at the end of the strand. Throughout the book, you'll see that there's a lot of activities, because SPHE is supposed to be activity-based. It's not just the teacher teaching and they're learning through their activities. the whole time. So you'll see different symbols throughout the book to indicate what each activity means, like a pair work symbol or an individual work symbol or a group work symbol. Just want to point out, I think it's really important when it's an individual work symbol and it says the instruction, you don't need to share what you write with the rest of the class. I just think it's important that the teacher emphasizes that with the students, because it makes a big difference to what they take from that activity and how much they write or how much they share. If they think that they're going to have to read out everything they write down to the rest of the class, they're not really going to share what they really think. If they think that it's just for them, maybe they're writing in the copy, maybe they're writing in the book, they might, if they know they don't have to share it with the rest of the class, they might be more likely to reflect a little bit more and delve a little bit deeper into their thoughts and share things differently. This time with the set of books, I have done PowerPoints for the first time. So the PowerPoints, I think, are very, very handy to give just a summary of the lesson. Sometimes you might just use the PowerPoints, sometimes you use a book and the PowerPoints, sometimes you won't use them at all. I think they're particularly useful for students with AEN and SEN because I've summarized the lesson. I can't stand it in books when you get a PowerPoint and it's just the whole lesson put on a slide. It's not useful. I find it's not useful. I like to have a summary of the lesson. So it'll still say the key words at the start. It'll still give the learning intentions at the start, but it'll give a summary of the main points of the lesson. But as well as that, there's additional resources, there's additional links, and there's additional activities. So if something comes up that they're particularly interested in, or it is a big issue in your school or in your class, you can spend some extra time with them by going through the PowerPoints, talking about what we already did in the lesson, and then doing additional exercises or resources or activities with them through the PowerPoints as well. These are some of the new animations with book 1 and book 2. And there's other animations all available on Folan's Hive, and they're easy to access on Folan's Hive. It's just a good way, I think, to stimulate conversation. Sometimes instead of you just talking, you can play the animation. It gets students talking. It gets them maybe giggling about something, but it's just another way to create interest. So these are ones that Folan's have created specifically for my book. I do have links to other things as well, and you'll see the little symbol for that in the book for digital resources, but these are ones that we have created. There's also ones on reproduction and puberty, and they're very useful, I think, to revise with second and third year. So you learn about it in first year, but before you go back onto the topic again in second and third year, it is a very useful way just to revise. They pick up something new every time. I talked to you a little bit about assessment earlier, and this is the action page I was referring to. At the end of each strand, we have these action pages, and there's 2 suggestions for, it could be for assessment, ongoing assessment or formal assessment, or it could be something that they might choose to use for their CBA. So it'll give a suggested task for their portfolio. It'll give suggestions on areas that they might research, the learning outcome that it's referring to, and then some useful websites that they might use to get that information. So that's at the end of each strand in each book. Okay, also we have the teacher's guide, and it is concise. I know we don't have time to read hundreds of pages, particularly when SPHE is many people's second subject or third subject or even fourth subject. We don't have time to read detailed teacher's guides, so it is concise and to the point. There is a Word version of the teacher's guide, so you can download it and edit to suit your school. There's also all the hyperlinks are there. That's handy to have open. When you're doing a lesson, you could just click on the hyperlinks. It's particularly if it's a lesson that has a lot of digital kind of resources or anything in it. And it also has links to additional resources and websites there too. In the teacher's guide, you'll also find a sample SPHE policy. Again, this is a Word document. You can just download it and you can edit it to suit your school. You can put in your school name, your school crest, the teachers in your school who teach SPHE. You can update it when people do training or different things like that, update it. So that's very handy, and I think everyone will have to, if you haven't already, updated your SPHE policy for the new specification. It's really handy to use it, even if you just use it as a starting point or use it to get ideas. It is a really handy way to start it. The department are big into the units of learning, and we're all supposed to be planning our own units of learning in our free time, which we know takes a lot of time. But I do have all the units of learning on the teacher's guide. Again, you can download these and you can edit them. So I have them aligned with the textbook. So lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. A suggested time that you spend on it, the title for it, because they like to have little titles for each unit of learning, assessment at the end of it. And then you can download that and edit to suit your school. Some schools will decide that we need to spend longer on diversity, or we need to spend longer on getting students settled in, or whatever it is. So you can edit that to suit, and then you can use it for next year, add your notes to it and say this, we need to spend more time on this or less time on that. So again, that's a downloadable Word document. Okay, so moving on now to my advice, my personal advice on teaching the new course or the new specification. So having gone through all the learning outcomes in great detail, this is my main perceptions of what I think is different between the 2016 specification and the 2023 specification. So I found that there's more focus on consent, so on giving consent, on receiving consent, not just consent for sex, but consent for other things like sharing images or consent for any type of touching or anything like that. So the big focus on that, not just in the relationships and sexuality strand, throughout the course is a huge focus on consent, which is a great thing. As I said already, there's a lot of emphasis on accessing reliable information, and we know this is a problem. I even noticed with the information that came out about the referendum there, that they have information on that about accessing reliable, trustworthy information. So obviously it's a big issue, and again, it's reiterated throughout the strands. There is more focus on the emotional and the social aspects of sex, and I think that came a lot from the students' feedback of the older course, that a lot of students found that there was a lot of focus on the physical aspect of sex, but nothing about emotionally and socially how it can affect them or affect relationships. Vaping, a new phenomenon, unfortunately, and yes, there's chapters on that vaping, which is kind of overtaken smoking. All aspects of sexuality are covered. So I said there has been a lot of kind of negative media attention about that we're teaching them pornography and we're teaching them about how to become transgender and all that. There is about gender identity on the course, but it is an aspect of it, and the focus is on that there's there is sexuality covered, but all aspects of sexuality, like I said, values and morals and beliefs and all these things, and gender identity is a part of that. About seeking help, about getting reliable help, about online safety, again, this is a big issue, Coco's Law, about pornography and how it can affect them, it can affect their relationships and their mental health. There's more of a focus on resilience, which I think is great, about developing their coping skills and protecting themselves, and how to recognise if they're having poor mental health or their well-being is suffering and what they can do about that. And there's more of a focus on their overall mental health and well-being, not just like on mental illness, about creating a more positive mental health and well-being. What I've noticed there's less focus on in this specification compared to 2016 is pregnancy. There's nothing really about pregnancy, about birth or reproduction. So yes, there is about sexual intercourse, but then after that, there's nothing really about pregnancy, birth, the physical aspects of sex. Grief and separation isn't really covered in this, or like bereavement and how people grieve, things like that isn't really covered. And I think that again is from feedback that really it's too sensitive of an area for SPHE teachers to cover with the whole class. I think there's a lot less repetition, which is a good thing. So it's not like first year setting goals, second year setting goals, third year setting goals. That because it's a broader course, that there's less room for repetition. So we're doing different aspects of different learning outcomes in each year. And like I mentioned earlier, I think there's less focus on specific mental health illnesses, but more on promoting overall positive mental health and good well-being. So my advice to teachers who are new to teaching SPHE or are new to teaching this new specification, like all of us are, or maybe that you have it on your timetable, you never had it before. What do you need to know before you teach it? So first of all, I think it's important to prepare well for the more sensitive topics. So obviously things like settling into school and study skills and things like that aren't something that's going to be particularly sensitive, but looking ahead and seeing what kind of areas are more sensitive. If you look at the teacher's guide, I've given you kind of a heads up sometimes before you do this lesson, have a look at this document or have a look at these guidelines, or make sure you're up to date with whatever in your school before you do this. If you click on the link there for the toolkit as well, they also have advice for teachers on how to prepare for teaching more sensitive topics. But as you know, sensitive topics can pop up at any time in SPHE. I think very, very, very important is to be familiar with the glossary and stick to this glossary. So the glossary is given at the end of the SPHE specification. It's in the teacher's guide as well for SPHE for wellbeing. And these are the words and the terms that we are supposed to stick to. Now, some of the language is a bit difficult and I've simplified it a little bit in the book, but I've stuck exactly to the glossary. An example of this, when we came across how important this is I came across the word intersex because on the HSE website, they say LGBTQI+, and on Belong To, they say LGBTQI+. However, in the specification, it's only LGBTQ. So I queried with the NCCA, why is there no I and why is there no plus when the HSE have it and Belong To have it? And they said that the intersex is not something that we are supposed to be teaching about, that it's a sensitive area, that they have it under advice, that this, based on international expert advice, the NCCA advises, I'm just reading from their reply there, that the teacher is not expected to engage in classroom discussion on complex medical aspects of sexuality. If questions such as intersex identifies or treatments that support a medical transition arise, it is safest to gently acknowledge that these are complex and best discussed with a medical expert. So that can be tricky when they're going to see LGBTQI+ on the HSE website and Belong To website, but it's not a term that's used in our book. I know it has been used in other books that they mightn't have had this clarification before they were published, but just stick into that glossary. So have that glossary, have the glossary from the SPHE specification or from our teacher's guide, and have that with you. Just be familiar with that glossary and stick to it. There are some videos on the PDST website which are very good. recorded from other training days for RSE or for SPHE. However, they are for the 2016 specification. Hopefully there will be some for the 2023 specification soon. If you haven't already, avail of any available training as soon as you can. So it just helps you to approach these topics with more confidence and gives you just a better idea of how to deal with group discussions and class discussions. And for anybody really, even if you've been teaching it years, like myself, that just to refresh your knowledge of everything that's on the course. It is really important to be aware of school policies. And again, I've talked about this in the teacher's guide, but policies like acceptable use policy and different things in your school that can be very relevant in SPHE. So to be up to date with those policies, and especially the next one, to, if you can, be involved in updating the school SPHE policy, because all schools will have to have it updated this year for the new specification. And if you go through it yourself, you're going to be a lot more familiar with it. So you can take the one from the teacher's guide, you can talk through it at SPHE meetings, and you know, that gives a good basis for discussion, and you can learn from other teachers, and you're more familiar with the policy before it goes to the board of management. If in doubt, you get a question that you're not comfortable with or a topic you're not sure of, defer. And I know when you're younger or inexperienced that you kind of want them to think you know everything, but it's not possible. There's some terms I don't know, there's words I don't know that they might ask me about in class. So defer, say, gosh, I'm not sure about that. I'll have to check the SPHE policy and I'll get back to you about that next week. Or that's an interesting question. Let's talk about that next week. Or another way to defer is the last one I said there, using the anonymous questioning in advance. So if you're saying to them, next week we're going to be talking about gender identity, or next week we're going to be talking about periods, or next week we're going to be talking about whatever it is, mental health, whatever it is, that you give them all a little post-it and they all have to write down a question on it. If they don't have a question, they write down, I don't have a question. If they do have the question, they write it down. You have time to go through them in advance. Some of them might be rubbish, some of them might be rude, some of them might be genuine questions, and you've time to prepare in advance, and then you address them in the lesson the following week. Okay, so my approach, so I just want to talk about my approach in the book to teaching a few little topics. One is about teaching food. This is one I'm particularly passionate about because I am a home economics teacher, and I did a master's a few years ago in applied culinary nutrition. And I think the whole way that we teach about food now has evolved, and it's very important that we approach this carefully, because it can lead to disordered eating or different things if we approach it in a very negative way. So the Irish Heart Foundation have brought out some really good guidance on teaching about food, and you can click on the link there to have a look at it yourself. But basically it's saying there's no good food, there's no bad food. The food isn't just for nourishment, food is also for enjoyment. Food helps us grow, food tastes good, things like that. But also I've taken a more practical approach to, which is makes it more accessible for young people, as in, if you got €5, you forgot your lunch and you €5, what can you buy in Centra that could be a balanced lunch? Now, €5 is not going to buy a lot these days, but it's making them think about what can they do themselves, or if they're packing their own lunch, what can they put in it to make them feel fuller for longer if they've got football training after school. So things like that, a more practical, accessible approach. Previous research in the past have found that students have found the way that we have been teaching about food, that it's judgmental and it's not very inclusive. So this approach hopefully will help them and will be more useful to everybody. The approach I've used to teaching RSE in the lessons, I hope that the information is presented in a non-judgmental way and it's age appropriate. I mentioned there was 2 learning outcomes I didn't cover in first year. I've just touched on them in second year. They're learning outcome 3.9 and 3.5. So 3.9 is about the importance of safer sexual activity and STIs and contraception, which I don't think is appropriate to cover in first year. It's kind of introduced in second year, but then done in more detail in the third year. And also 3.5, which is about reproductive health, is kind of again introduced in second year and then done in more detail in the third year. There's a huge emphasis, like I said, on the importance of giving and receiving consent. And I've extended that to other things like sharing images of people and sharing private information about people or friends or boyfriends or girlfriends without their consent. Also, my approach to teaching about gender identity, it acknowledges that while most people's gender matches what their sex at birth, that this isn't the case for everybody. But also it's pointed out in the lessons that some people might be a bit confused about their gender, and so some people might be gay, some people might be bisexual, but also that if you think that some girl is pretty, it doesn't mean that you're a lesbian. If you think that some boy is handsome, it doesn't mean that you are gay, that people can explore this. It's not asking them to talk about how they feel about their gender. It's just asking them to to think about it, but also to accept that everybody is different and gender identity is just one part of who we are and one part of our sexuality. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that yes, parents do have the right, if they want to, withdraw their child from SPHE, but that's a matter that is up for your school management to deal with. If they're not happy about what's being taught or what's on the specification, it is their right to take them out. But again, your school management can deal with that. But I think I'm done now. I will pass you over to Connor for some questions.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. You might click forward to the next slide. Yeah, so just I mentioned earlier that obviously this coincides with us publishing our new book, SPHE for Wellbeing 1, 2 and 3. And there's lots of information available about the series on folens.ie, which you can check out. But if you'd like to get in touch with our Folens educational consultants and our reps, essentially, they're available to chat in more detail with you about the series. By all means, get in touch with them, and it's very easy to do. If you just go onto folens.ie and if you enter either your school name or roll number in the Find Your Rep section of the website, which is easy to find, that'll throw back their contact details, and you can speak with them. And we've just added the link to that web page into the chat there for you to take a look at. And also, there's a lot of change happening with respect to the government funded funding scheme for junior cycles. So there's lots of expertise in our team that will help to guide you and discuss solutions that we have in place to make that really easy to organise at a time of change for you as well. So yeah, if you want to click through to the next slide here for the Q&A. Thanks, Stephanie. So thanks for the presentation. That was really interesting. I think, we worked together on a couple of different publications for SPHE, and one of the things that I've discovered each time is I'm reminded each time of how tricky sometimes the subject it is to navigate. So if you layer then on top of that the fact that there's curriculum change happening, it probably adds a little bit to the anxiety or the worry about that. So I think that there's a lot in that presentation that was really helpful, I'm sure, to teachers. So we have, as I said, we're taking questions now, and there's a couple that I have been asked in recent days, actually, that I just took note of, that maybe the people joining in would like to hear the answer to. And I know that some of this may be touched on what you've already presented on, Stephanie, but first thing I have here is, what do you think is the most challenging topic to teach in the new course? Do you have any views on that?
I think the RSE, the relationships and sexuality, because it's getting a lot of press, I think then teachers are feeling under pressure about what they should say and what they shouldn't say, and that can be difficult. So, like I said, I think being familiar with the glossary, having that glossary with you, checking the words on it, and if possible, get the RSE training if you can get it. But yeah, it probably is the hardest part to cover. But also, I think some of the mental health aspects, we have to be so careful with what we say because they're so, teenagers can be so easily, they're vulnerable, they so easily impressioned, and we have to be just very careful about that. And again, sticking to the terminology and just reading up a little bit on it before you teach the topic to help you be more confident and to make sure you get it right.
Okay, I have another one here. Just asks then at what stage in the books, I guess they're asking specifically about our approach to it, but at what stage in the books are contraception and STIs covered? So I guess you did mention that, I think, a little bit in earlier, didn't you?
Yeah. So in second year, they're introduced kind of to the topic of STIs, but they're not covered in detail. And then in third year, STIs and contraception are going to be covered in more detail.
Okay. And on that, actually, just, are there certain topics that you, like, would you describe the approach for SPHE for wellbeing? Is it spiraled in the sense that we tend to kind of revisit topics each year, but maybe at a sort of different level of age and state appropriateness as you move through into second and third year? Or, is it more discrete that you cover, topics 1 to 3 in book 1 and so on into books 2 and 3, that they're quite distinct? How would you describe your approach there?
Yeah, so I'd say it progresses because some of the learning outcomes are very detailed. The language is quite complex in some of them. So we had questions about, what they actually mean. So parts of a learning outcome could be covered in first year, it'll progress in second year, and the same thing in third year, depending on, age appropriateness.
Yeah. There's a question here then that's coming on student engagement. Do you have any suggestions for how to approach lesson warm-ups to engage students?
So I had in the previous book, I had a warm-up lesson, a warm-up activity at the beginning of every lesson. But then there was kind of feedback saying you don't have time to do a warm-up activity at the beginning of every lesson. So what I've done this time instead is put a big list of general warm-up activities in the teacher's guide. So there's 2 pages of general ones, and I like to keep them simple. They don't require like 20 paper cups and 30 plastic straws or anything like that to do the warm-up activity. They're ones that you can do in your classroom. You don't need any resources for or anything like that. It's just, the teacher tells them the instruction. So there's a list of those in the teacher's guide that can be used for various lessons.
Okay. And do you have any tips for controlling the classroom? That's just in terms of the discipline. I guess that some of the subject matter can kind of trigger excitement in your class. So how do you, what kind of rules of engagement do you set for your class to make sure that doesn't get too wild or out of control?
That's a whole teaching methodology course, I think. But I know I'm kind of old school and a little bit stricter maybe than maybe the newer approach to teaching. But I suppose setting clear instructions at the start, giving people, guidelines on the discussion. The SPHE contract at the beginning of the book is important that they adhere to, I don't interrupt other people when they're speaking. I give opinions that are my opinions. So I start the sentence with I, instead of saying that's stupid, that I think that something isn't whatever. So they refer back to the SPHE contract. And at the beginning as well, at the SPHE contract, they've agreed what happens, what's the sanction if someone doesn't follow those rules. So I suppose to enforce them, setting time limits on discussions, bringing the class back together. So you're not letting them just go off and talk and they're doing their own thing, just bringing them back in, and giving them, clear instructions, I think is really important.
Great. Thanks so much for that. I've noticed during the presentation a lot of people still streaming in. So I'm conscious though that we're kind of pushing close to 10 to 8. So I think we might just wrap it there. That's as much time as we have to get to the questions. I do think that if anyone has any subsequent questions, by all means, if you know your Folan's rep or if you just want to fire an email into us, we can do that. You know, there's no problem at all. There's lots of different avenues through which you can ask questions to us, and we'll be happy to answer them. So with that, Stephanie, firstly, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for giving such a comprehensive presentation. I thought it was really beneficial. Like, it was useful because it looked at the curriculum. It also gave us a chance to do, you know, to showcase a little bit of what we have in SPHE for Wellbeing, which I hope people will look at and they will like. And also just useful tips, I think, that were in there, which I suppose will hopefully help to give teachers some ideas on how to teach what can be sometimes a sort of a sensitive and difficult subject that to teach. So thank you for that. And to everybody out there, to all the teachers out there who joined us this evening, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I know particularly this time of year, if you're a Leaving Cert teacher, there's so much converging all at once between, I guess, your mocks maybe have just finished, you've got orals, you've got project work, you've got CAO stuff, because there's probably a guidance responsibility for a lot of the people who are joining us today. And it's all going on. So, you know, we really appreciate you giving us more or less an hour of your time. And I hope that you find you found it beneficial and you've found it worthwhile. I see some questions just coming in about, can we get the webinar? It's all recorded. You'll get the webinar recording, and we'll also share the slide decks with you. But you know, having said that, it's been great. It's been a really useful webinar. Thanks so much again, Stephanie. Thanks everybody for joining, and we hope to see you at the next webinar that we host. So have a great evening, and goodbye and good evening.
Thank you.